Welcome, aviation enthusiasts and curious minds, to Cleared for Takeoff, the podcast where we delve into the intricate details of flight, safety, and the human element in the skies. I'm your host, Ethan Goldsmith, and today we're going to unpack a tragic event from NASCAR history that offers profound lessons for all of us in the aviation community, the helicopter accident involving the legendary Davey Allison. It was July 12, 1993, a day that sent shockwaves through the world of stock car racing. Davey Allison, a name synonymous with speed and success, a true icon of NASCAR, was involved in a fatal helicopter crash. Piloting his recently acquired Hughes 369HS, Allison sustained critical head injuries and, heartbreakingly, passed away the following day. His passenger, fellow racing veteran Red Farmer, suffered serious but thankfully non-fatal injuries. Now, for those unfamiliar with Davey Allison, he was more than just a racer. Born into one of NASCAR's most celebrated families, he was a superstar in his own right, a Daytona 500 winner and a future champion in the making. At just 32, his loss was immense, especially for a family that had already faced so much tragedy. His brother had died the year prior, and his father, Bobby Allison, had suffered a serious head injury in 1988. Davey's passing truly evoked widespread grief, particularly in his home state of Alabama. The accident itself occurred at approximately 2:55 p.m. Central Daylight Time, within the infield of the Talladega Superspeedway. The intended landing zone was a confined asphalt area known as the media parking lot, roughly 168 feet long and 105 feet wide, bordered by a 10-foot-high fence. This was a tight spot, to say the least. Davey had owned this Hughes 369HS for less than a month. Friends described his burgeoning passion for flying as an addiction. This detail, his intense enthusiasm for a new pursuit, is a subtle but important backdrop to what the National Transportation Safety Board, or NTSB, would later uncover. Let's get into the NTSB's investigation and the accident sequence. According to witnesses, the helicopter approached the media parking lot from the south, heading north at an altitude of about 50 feet. It began a very slow descent, hovering down to just about a foot above the ground. Then, at a critical moment, hovering between 6 inches and 1 foot off the ground, the helicopter started to oscillate noticeably from side to side. It appeared to turn about 30 degrees to the right. What happened next was rapid and uncontrolled. The aircraft descended quickly, reaching an estimated 75 to 100 feet above nearby powerline poles. Red Farmer, the passenger, recounted that at this point, the flight became very violent, so disorienting that he saw sky and ground in quick succession, indicating extreme attitude changes. After this uncontrolled ascent, the helicopter began to rotate counterclockwise. It then banked sharply to the left before impacting the terrain and that 10-foot fence right next to the intended landing site. A crucial factor in this sequence was Davey Allison's decision to attempt a downwind landing. This is generally considered contrary to standard aviation procedure for helicopters. Why? Because it significantly increases power requirements and reduces control authority, especially when transitioning to a hover. This was a confined asphalt area, surrounded by high obstructions, despite more open landing zones being available nearby. The NTSB noted that this sequence, the slow descent, sudden uncontrolled ascent, and violent maneuvers, is highly indicative of an aerodynamic phenomenon often encountered during downwind hover or landing attempts, particularly in confined spaces. It points directly to a pilot struggling to manage the helicopter's energy and control under challenging aerodynamic conditions. Now, let's talk about Davey Allison's pilot information and flight experience, because this is where the NTSB's findings really hone in on human factors. Davey held a private pilot certificate with ratings for airplanes and helicopters. He'd obtained his helicopter rating in July 1992, about a year before the accident. His total accumulated flight time across all aircraft types was substantial, approximately 1,073 hours. However, his experience specifically in helicopters was comparatively limited, totaling about 54 hours. And here's the critical distinction. Only 9 of those hours were in the accident aircraft, the Hughes 369HS. The vast majority of his helicopter time, approximately 45 hours, was in the Robinson R-22, a model the NTSB described as less demanding. His instructional time in the Hughes 369HS was remarkably brief, just 2.8 hours. His flight instructor, John Corley, told the NTSB that downwind landings were not part of the training curriculum during these sessions. He also observed that Allison tended to hover at about 25 feet, significantly higher than the recommended 3 feet, and to execute approaches that were too fast and shallow. These habits, the NTSB concluded, were attributed to his prior training and experience in the smaller, slower Robinson R-22. To further underscore the gap in his type-specific experience, insurance companies had stipulated that Allison complete 25 hours of flight training in the Hughes 369HS before flying solo, and an additional 25 hours of solo flight before carrying any passengers. It's clear from the NTSB report that Davey Allison did not meet these critical requirements prior to the accident. This highlights a common vulnerability in general aviation, the challenges of transferring pilot skills across diverse aircraft types. The habits from the R-22, while perhaps suitable for that aircraft, proved ill-suited for the more complex Hughes 369HS. Moving on to the aircraft examination and mechanical integrity. Post-crash, NTSB investigators found no evidence of any pre-impact mechanical malfunction in the tail rotor system or other critical components. Metallurgical analyses of fractured parts consistently showed breaks indicative of a violent impact, not pre-existing fatigue or failure. The aircraft was extensively damaged, but the A-frame assembly and the aft cargo passenger compartment largely remained intact. A critical finding during the wreckage examination was the absence of shoulder straps, which were originally supplied by the manufacturer for use by the occupants. This detail, as we'll see, became central to the legal proceedings. So, what was the NTSB's probable cause determination? In its final report issued on March 21, 1995, the NTSB formally concluded that the primary cause of the accident was the pilot's poor in-flight decision to land downwind in a confined area that was surrounded by high obstructions, and his failure to properly compensate for the tailwind condition. A significant contributing factor was the pilot's lack of total experience in the type of aircraft. Jim Hall, the NTSB's chairman at the time, made it very clear, stating, "In almost every accident that occurs, the individual that's operating the vehicle doesn't intend for an accident to occur. But in this particular situation, the facts speak for themselves." This statement emphasizes the board's conviction that the accident stemmed from operational errors rather than unforeseen circumstances or mechanical failures. Now, let's turn to the legal proceedings and their broader safety implications. In January 1994, Allison's estate, along with Red Farmer, filed a $25 million lawsuit against McDonnell Douglas Helicopter Systems, the manufacturer. The lawsuit contended that the crash was caused by a failure of the helicopter's collective socket, alleging a manufacturing defect. However, NTSB investigator Rolf Saffer explicitly refuted this claim of pre-impact mechanical failure related to the collective socket. He stated that there was no indication of failure of that socket prior to the accident. There was no evidence of any fatigue failure. In fact, the failure of that socket would not be consistent with the loss of control that we found and witnesses stated that occurred. This NTSB position directly contradicted the central premise of the lawsuit. In August 1995, a judge ruled against the Allison estate in their lawsuit. The court's decision didn't hinge on establishing the cause of the accident itself, but rather on the evidence that the shoulder harnesses, originally supplied with the helicopter, had been removed. Expert testimony from a biomechanics specialist was crucial, establishing that both Davey Allison's death and Red Farmer's injuries would likely have been prevented had they been wearing the provided shoulder harnesses. This finding effectively relieved the manufacturer of liability for the injury sustained. Despite the ruling, an undisclosed settlement was reached in 1996 between McDonnell Douglas and the Allison estate. The broader implications for aviation safety from the Davey Allison accident are profound. The NTSB's definitive findings, focusing on poor in-flight decision and lack of total experience in the type of aircraft, reinforce the critical importance of pilot judgment and comprehensive type-specific training. This case serves as a poignant reminder that even experienced pilots, especially those transitioning to new or more complex aircraft, must rigorously adhere to training protocols and understand the specific performance characteristics and limitations of the aircraft they operate. The observed habits carried over from the less demanding Robinson R-22 to the Hughes 369HS underscored the necessity of unlearning old habits and adapting to the new aircraft's requirements. Furthermore, the legal outcome, which centered on the absence of shoulder harnesses, profoundly highlighted the indispensable role of installed safety equipment in mitigating injury severity during an accident. Even if an accident is unavoidable due to operational factors, the proper use of safety restraints can be the decisive factor between minor injuries, serious injuries, or fatalities. This aspect of the case reinforced the legal and moral imperative for pilots and operators to ensure all safety equipment is present, functional, and utilized by all occupants. In conclusion, the tragic death of Davey Allison in July 1993